Hello and welcome to The Right Idea, where we discuss the people, policy, and politics that drive Texas. I'm your host, Brian Phillips, the Chief Communications Officer at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and with me, as always, is our Vice President of Policy, Derek Cohen. How are things going? We are getting to the end of the session. How are you feeling?
The end is in sight. We just need to put a finer point on a couple things, and then we can get ready for all the, dare we say.
Well, we will get into all of that, of course, throughout the show. Always like to start off with something a little bit fun, a little bit light. At the beginning of the show, we had the what some people are calling the DeSantis DeSaster. The announcement this week, of course, that Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is in the race. And again, that's not any editorializing from me. I really like the guy. But, you know, from a communications perspective, it probably wasn't the best announcement, presidential announcement that's ever been. So interesting to see the reaction on that. Did you watch it at all? Did you see it?
I logged in at first, then I had a meeting when they finally got it up and running. So I wasn't able to watch it, but I'm logged in. I looked at the other people logged in. I saw Rudy Giuliani was logged in. I'm like, But all that to say is, yeah, technical difficulties notwithstanding, I know that Governor DeSantis is a lot of folks' number one guy on this particular race, and obviously we don't want to get into a point where we start talking about the presupposition that we're going to have a two-person fight between Trump and DeSantis. That's kind of the rank punditry side that everyone's kind of running with. And you know what? I could easily see a scenario, even with the field as it is and the field that's growing, where whoever the Republican nominee is neither of those two.
Right. Well, the good news is that people are only talking about this because this is the only thing to talk about, right? I mean, we have several lifetimes between now and Iowa in the presidential race, and so everyone's kind of bagging on him right now. No one will remember this next week. I mean, he'll have his first event, and then everyone will talk about how many people showed up and what are the audience sizes like, and what did he say, and how does that contrast with Trump? So everybody will forget the technical difficulties of announcing on Twitter.
And all the bloggers can do, and they can do the thing where they zoom out all the way and make it look like something's unattended. Not that we see that around here, but
There's a little subtweet for our fans out there. I was on the Cruz campaign when we launched, and we were the first ones ever to do it on Twitter, and we were 20 minutes late, and the tweet didn't go through, or the whatever it was, the video that we had posted. And of course, it was like mass chaos back at headquarters. Nobody remembered that. Nobody cared. The week later. So anyway, congratulations to DeSantis for getting in. Also, Tim Scott, also another great conservative, got into the race this week. He too had technical difficulties during his speech. The mics were going out. So,
one thing I could say about Scott's announcement is I just wish the guy had a little more energy.
Put a little more energy.
The revival style I thought was a nice touch, but
I can't wait for the debates. I mean, I've heard that Trump's not going to be part of the debates. I think, which is a real mistake, or at least for the country, it's not good to have one of the front runners up there. I can't wait to see Tim Scott on the debate stage talking about the issues that matter. That's always been kind of a hallmark of his. Is he really cares about the issues and the policies, and really gets into he's a real workhorse. Really, the show horse versus workhorse. Yeah. He's a show horse in the Senate, and so I'm excited to see what he brings to the race.
Yeah, we've interacted in years past with both him and the office,
sure.
And it's
criminal justice reform, big one.
Absolutely, and that exceptionally, he is. There's no. It's not when you go to the office. He's not like, I'll pawn you off on the LD. He's like, no, I want you to walk me through this. And I was. You're just taken aback by how hands-on he is on that approach. And again, not to as an endorsement or anything. I'm just crediting the guy for having a very, very thoughtful approach to policy.
So if we're not technically in the presidential season, it is certainly upon us, at least in the next few months or so. No, I think there will be plenty of announcements to come. I'll be interested to see who else gets in it, but I will not be one of them. I've got plenty going on at home.
Let me know so I can start pulling the oppo together.
Yeah, exactly.
Bundled into a nice little dossier.
That's it. All the oppo you need is in my Twitter feed, which you can find me at RealBphil at Twitter. All right, so let's get back to our show. Let's get back to Texas because there is a lot to talk about. This is the last week. Top topics for this week are talk about a little new polling. Of course, the new polling will show that it is the same as the old polling. The Dems want to keep sexually explicit materials in schools. They all voted for it this week, so we'll talk about how that might play out. Should non-citizens be able to vote in Texas? There was a big vote on a constitutional amendment to prevent non-citizens from voting in Texas. There's a bit debate over armed guards in schools. I know school safety is another one of those issues that's kind of coming to a head here at the end of the session. And then is it finally time to say the S word, which we're not allowed to say, or else it will come into being.
Saskatchewan?
Yeah, that's the one. That's the one. So we'll talk about that at the end. What is the mysterious S word? But first, let's get your general thoughts. Your Lege-Land update on session and coming to the end. 5 days away as we sit here from sine die. And how do you see things?
Well, I think it's one of the most categorical observations I can make is that everything is dead except the stuff that's not.
Okay, well, that makes sense.
All right, so are we done?
That was actually true on the first day of session.
Also very true.
So here we are.
No, I think all joking aside, we do see a lot of good legislation already on the governor's desk, already signed by the governor, or seemingly a step or two away from that with the time that we still have. And I think that, we've mentioned this prior. I think conservatives generally, we're not necessarily that great on celebrating victories all the time or celebrating good incremental improvement. We're the incremental list, but we don't celebrate incremental improvement.
What about a circular firing squad doesn't just scream celebration to you?
Exactly. But the funny thing is, and you see that is people's perspective, the way they talk about a lot of that's been going on in session. And don't get me wrong, there has been a lot in this session that no matter what your stripe is, that you can be frustrated about. There's absolutely many missed opportunities where we're talking about, kind of the tenuous position that property taxes are in right now, even though I'm hopeful that that'll get done. School choice, parental empowerment, not getting the shrift it deserves, border security. We can do a whole thing on border security. These are things that left a lot of stuff on the cutting room floor. But we'd be remiss not to talk about the stuff that actually got across the goal line. And that's things that are as consequential and sweeping as SB 14, the gender modification bill. Things you already mentioned about seeing that content quality and standards in school. The Death Star we've talked about millions of times. These are all things that have gone along. But we also
ESG bill. I mean, that was a big one, though. Keeping the ESG out of insurance. That
was a huge one, and again, credit to I believe it was Representative Isaac again. Friend of the show, common name you've heard. But just definitely outperforming expectations for a freshman. All this is happening, and then even the stuff that doesn't necessarily get much fanfare, if any at all. Look at some of the stuff that Andrew Brown had been working on in the foster care realm. Ending hidden foster care, basically allowing bureaucrats to come into your house and break up your family on the threat that if they don't, they will come in your house and break up your family.
Nice family you have here. It'd be a shame if something happened to it.
And so putting guardrails on that practice, eliminating that, well, not eliminating, but putting some serious guardrails on that. A CPS omnibus reform, that we've seen, and just everything that's gone through. That's flown under the radar. I know, obviously, we've talked in the healthcare space. We've talked about, the pricing transparency. But another thing that hadn't been talked about is the association health plan. So now, professional organizations can now can actually create a risk pool of their own and allow that to actually,
or churches or any neighborhood, associations.
Absolutely, and all those things are ways that, as we've discussed, do not put more of the burden of health care on everybody, but allows the burden of healthcare and the cost of healthcare to come down.
You're making a really good point about the successes we have, and one thing I want to highlight about that, and again, not to be too Pollyannish, because there will be plenty of time to talk about what didn't get done or the things that got watered down and all of that. But just to make this point is that a lot of the things that did get across the finish line this time, it's not like we invented this or that they just came up at the beginning of this session. A lot of stuff, particularly like the association health plans and other issues, started 3 or 4 sessions ago. And so there had to be, although they, didn't get to the governor's desk in 2017, there was progress made on every single one of these issues. That's happening right now.
Gets to that tipping point and then it goes.
Absolutely. And that's happening now with some of these issues that, we're pounding our fist on the table saying, why didn't this get through? And, why are you wasting so much time? And we should be working on these issues. There's progress being made on those issues so that when they come up in subsequent sessions, that they will get done. And I know everybody, wants it to happen today or happen, yesterday. But there is progress being made on a number of these issues. Literally, I think almost everything that you brought up, including gender mod for kids, healthcare issues, and not everything you just brought up had some level of progress in previous sessions. And a lot of those things now, because we've been making the case year after year, are getting huge bipartisan majorities, and they're getting through, and that's why they're getting through the House and getting through the Senate, which frankly is a good way to do it, that you're not just having partisan fights all the time.
Now, I will say, though, there are some things that I think are really on the bubble and can go either way, and I think some of that includes some of the grid stuff. And that's probably what I'm most worried about. But again, you can hold in your mind both concern for a particular policy area while still celebrating ones that have made significant advancements or have gotten across the goal line.
So this is a good time for some shameless plugs. Of course, I always like to do that for our newsletter. You can find it at texaspolicy.com/thepost. Today's article, in fact, we've got some exclusive content in there. I talk about some of the things that might have been under the radar that did pass the session and are headed to the governor's desk. So again, you can sign up for that at texaspolicy.com/thepost. Also, our wrap-up session, we will be featuring Derek and Andrew Brown, two of our top legislative experts, along with Sherry Sylvester, who was a longtime aide for the lieutenant governor, who's now with TPPF, and then of course our CEO Greg Sindelar will be there, and they'll be talking about that. That'll be on Wednesday, and you can view that online, but you can also of course come if you're in the area. You can come to TPPF and watch that event. I believe it's around noon. It's probably lunchtime, but you can find out those event details. TPPF doing its big legislative wrap up on Wednesday, this coming Wednesday, around lunchtime. TexasPolicy.com will have those details. Okay. Anything else in the session before we dive into top topics?
Not much left to it, but to do it.
All right. So the first one I want to highlight is that a new poll came out from the University of Texas Tyler, and they have a fantastic polling operations. I give pollsters all kinds of guff just because I used to work for one, and so I can see a bad poll. I can smell a bad poll from a mile away. This one is very good, and not just because it has a lot of answers that I like, but in terms of their methodology and how they do the poll is actually very good. UT Tyler again is the poll. Here's some results that came out of it, and I like these kinds of polls right at the end of session because the messaging has been done, the debate has been had, the public has paid attention and weighed in, and testimony has been had, and the votes have been had, and so everybody's had a chance to iron out what they believe on these issues. Some of the top ones that we talk about: support for school choice. Again, this is the 5 millionth poll that's come out in the last 5 years, showing a large support for school choice is up 54 to 34, and this is Texas registered voters. Support school choice 54 to 34. Support, and then they even asked a very specific question about state funding for private schools, which is of course what the left always tries to use to say, well, that's bad. We shouldn't be using public money for private schools. Turns out Texans disagree. 52 to 39 say that's okay. A couple other issues, and I'll get your reaction to them. Disapproval of the Biden border policy. I don't think should come in as any shock. Disapproving of Biden's border policy 65 to 27.
I want to talk to those 27.
Yeah, what's he doing right down there? The number of Texans who say there are only 2 genders is at 72%, and I highlight that one because that obviously includes a significant number. About a third of Democrats say that same thing. So as we've talked about here, pushing the transgender issue, particularly when it comes to minors, has been a complete a disaster for the left. And then one that I always think is fun to highlight is that 61% of Texans never use Twitter. And so for those I know a lot of the insiders here are always fighting. Derek and I are always on Twitter. The reality is that the vast majority of Texans don't use that medium. So Twitter, again, is not real life. So back to the policy issues, though. School choice, border policy, any of those issues stand out as things to be surprised about?
Well, not really. One, you mentioned that the other polling that we've done in that space has basically, in the margin dances around, and sometimes a liberal polling outfit actually outkicks our numbers sometimes. But we generally see a broad support for school choice, especially in areas, rural areas where there's this fiction, and that's what it is, it's a fiction, that it'll destroy the schools or that nobody needs it and all that. And the people that you see take up that mantle and run with it are usually interested parties or the useful idiots that are used by those interested parties. And that is something that I really question how much longer will be tenable. Because you mentioned us being on Twitter. We're above the 39% apparently.
Right. And that's among people who use social media, by the way. There's still an 11% that don't use social media at all. So actually the number of people in Texas who are not on Twitter is probably closer to like 70%.
I bet they're more interesting than people that are actually on Twitter. But we see the debates on there, and it's all like, nobody wants this. And it's like, oh, and I'm from Muleshoe, Texas, or whatever, and then you look up that district, and the Republican primary electorate went 92% in favor of school choice on the ballot question, and you generally see that again. It's this recitation and microwaving of old stale takes on this, and again, it's getting to a point where the opponents of school choice are just like fingers in the ears and saying la 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 la, I'm not hearing this, and the debate's moving around them at this point. And I think that we are going to be seeing that. Now, you also mentioned the stuff on the border policy, and I made it the flippant remark. I'd like to see that 27. Identify for me, please, what it is that he is doing. Not doing successfully.
Just doing it all.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the funny thing is, and I know I mentioned this on this program before, is I had a friend in from Chicago, and she was asking questions about the border, and she was surprised to learn, because we had another person in our party who had grown up in El Paso, and he was saying that these border Democrats on this issue, they're hawkish, that are more hawkish than many Republicans elsewhere in the state on this question because of having that lived experience. People are seeing that, and we see this debate like, oh well, it's racist and all that. It's getting to a point where if something significant doesn't get done, and to be honest with you, I don't think we're going to see We're going to see something. The significance of that is yet to manifest. We're going to see something. Is that going to be enough? I don't believe so.
And is the public going to feel it? I mean, are they, even if we say, oh, we created the border protection unit, or oh, we made it a state felony to to cross the border? Are those policies going to, once we start executing them, are they going to actually see a measurable impact at the border? And I think that's the big question.
I don't know how much we can do just from the state level.
One of the things I did, just to be fair, there were some results in the poll that are things that we wouldn't support or that conservatives wouldn't support, and I want to get your take on that. One of them is raise the age. I mean, with school safety issues and with the mass shootings that are going around the country, and several big ones here in Texas, you have 66% of Texans who believe that people under the age of 21 should not be able to buy guns, or at least buy certain guns. Patently unconstitutional for a variety of reasons. How do we address that issue with the public, where we say, look, we obviously want public safety, but there's this issue of constitutional rights, of course, that can't be abridged. How would you go about doing that?
We were just having this conversation the other day, me and one of our colleagues, and essentially we found, and one thing that, experience will support this as well, essentially there is such a lack of education. We talk about Texas being a rural state, and I did not grow up I grew up in a very poor blue collar area of Ohio, but I wasn't exposed at all to firearms in any way, shape, or form until my professional life, when I worked at the Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Garden. Granted, that was before Harambe, before anyone starts rumor mongering or any of that stuff.
And that was an elephant gun you had to carry, right?
We didn't. Well, no, we didn't carry, but we had to train on and be proficient on that platform. But that and a 12 gauge slug gun. But that being said, I had no appreciation until I started professionally having to develop into that. And what we see is even in rural Republicans, a lot of these members, I'm not saying all, but a lot of them have never fired a gun before. And if you remember, we make fun. You remember we saw that piece. I can't remember what particular effect online source it was in, but it basically the guy saying, I fired an AR-15 and I was traumatized and irritable for like a week. And
that was a meme for about a week.
Yes, exactly. I'm gonna have to look that up when we're done. We can put it in the show notes. Who knows?
But Jefferson, you can add that to the. you can cut away to that.
But all that to say is, if you don't have that healthy understanding or respect for it, you just don't think that ever factors into any part of life, let alone the part of, the part that it guarantees on self-determination, right?
Sure.
And so that's why a lot of people have these questions where it's like, well, what's the you ask somebody who's over 21, well, what's the problem? Well, I'm over 21. No problem with me. And you ask folks that are, basically having no interest in them whatsoever, what's the problem with it, even if they're under 21 or what? And they're like, no problem. And so again, there's this attenuation with the relationship with what it is that they're seeking to regulate. And I think that the only way, and I hope to push the conversation a little in that direction, is just to have a massive education effort. Now, will that be enough?
Yeah.
I don't know. Because, not all of us get that Bloomberg money to show up every session.
Well, and I also think it's really about understanding your audience. I mean, TPBF never really weighed in on that issue, although we have done, stuff on Second Amendment rights before. Didn't really weigh in on that issue. If we did, I would really want to understand, whether or not, I just don't think that the constitutional argument is going to carry a lot of weight with people who are scared, people who are afraid or seeing the people lose their lives, innocent people lose their lives, and then you come in and say, well, but it's my constitutional right. It's not wrong. It's just that's not a convincing argument for the 66%, or even maybe or more for people who feel that way.
And I think that again, when people are scared, they want the government to step in and help. And of course, I mean, even though in the Uvalde instance that gentleman was under that age threshold, there is no guarantee that would have stopped the exact same event from happening.
Right. And that's what I worry about, too, especially on the Second Amendment issues, is we'll pass these laws and we'll think, okay, this will never happen again. And of course, it won't stop the next one from happening. And so there's this false sense of security, which I think we cling to.
The incident Uvalde happened, the federal government passed a massive spending bill in response to it, because what problem exists that the federal government can't throw money at? And yesterday on the anniversary, Biden was out there saying the rhetoric from the day before it happened to yesterday, completely unchanged. So why are we having the conversation around nibbling around the edges on restriction rather than dealing with some of the other issues in play?
Yep. Okay, moving on from the poll, I want to get to a couple other issues. One thing I wanted to hit to make sure, because it's something we've talked about a lot, is that this week, HB 900, which is the bill from Representative Jared Patterson that would tighten the process for making sure that materials that are not appropriate for certain ages, making sure that age-appropriate material gets into schools, and making sure there's a process for making sure that sexually explicit material and things like that do not get into the schools. That bill passed the House and then this week passed the Senate. So that one is heading to the governor's office. But I was, this is one of the things that I've just been scratching my head at this whole session, and it's finally come to a head here. Is that 52 Democrats voted against this bill, right? Now you've got the contrast, of course, is that we've got bills that require age verification to get on to pornographic websites, and you're getting huge bipartisan majorities with lots of Democrats saying, oh, absolutely, we need to protect kids, when they're online from accessing this, sexually explicit material, absolutely 100%. But when it comes to that same kind of material in the school library, now all of a sudden it's book banning or it's anti-gay or whatever whatever excuses. And it's just, I've been scratching my head this whole time, and here we are at the end. And I never really thought at the end of the day that we would get to it, that we would see this level, the vast majority of the Democrat Party opposing the ability to try and restrict and trying to, tighten up this process so that these materials aren't getting into the schools. But here we are, 52 Democrats voted no.
Yeah, I mean, well, again, I'd like to point out this is a nice, simple bipartisan bill. But
to their credit, there were a dozen or so Democrats that obviously got this and did vote for it.
But again, if you listen to the argument, it's not about the substance of the bill. It's about the perceived goring of one of their pieties. And it gets to,
so because it has to do with schools and because it has to do with with teachers and administrators,
because that some of this obscene material was written by a woman of color, or because it addresses themes relevant to the LGBTQIA plus minus ampersand community. All that stuff is one of the, again, it's like, oh, well, a member of the coalition is under assault, then we have to show up. The problem is, and as you see with votes like this is what's breaking the coalition. Again, if you had a just center-left viewpoint saying, like, you know what, you probably need some workplace protections, maybe loosen a little state law around unionization, raise the minimum wage, all this, the cookie-cutter stuff that people think might be too boring, conservatives would have a lot of trouble on their hands, because these are things that, are 55-45 issues when you get into them, the things I mentioned.
Yeah.
But they're focusing on the stuff that is far more out in the fringe, and you're not going to be blessed with, bad opponents for your entire life. So I worry that, folks on our side might get a little weak in, having, again, no intellectual opposition or very weak intellectual opposition on the other side, where you have folks just, having to get at the front mic in the House and call everyone racist and impugn their motives and stuff like that, because they don't have a leg to stand on the actual argument. And that's why we're at where we're at. And
that's one of the things I wanted to bring up too, is that it's not like they are with, you look at an issue like this and you say, look, obviously kids should not have access to sexually explicit material in schools. And clearly that even if you think that there's some intellectual benefit to having kids look at this kind of material, certainly they shouldn't be doing without their parents' knowledge of it. And so that's really what the bill sought to remedy. If they thought that the bill was too broad, that it included, Maya Angelou poems, or that it included, great works of literature that would include violent scenes, or even, what would be considered sexual scenes or something of a sexual nature, even if it included some of those things, then work with the bill authors to make sure that it doesn't. But that's not what they did. I mean, they just came out and said, well, this is too broad, but then they offer no solution. So now they're not on the record as saying, well, we think this is a problem with you, and we're going to help to make sure that kids don't get this material. Instead, we're just going to vote no. And of course, that no vote means that they're supportive of the material being in schools, and of course, the parents not knowing.
Can you
about
believe what they did? Click this Act Blue link to fix this now.
Yeah, well, then they go out and fundraise on it, of course, to the next thing. So anyway, I wanted to close the loop on that. The HB 900 is a great bill, and it is going to the governor's office, or the governor's desk, to hopefully be signed there. Continuing on with the theme of head-scratching votes, there was a, and this is actually something I didn't even know was going to come up.
Is there a limit to how long the show can go? Because that's going to be the theme.
Yeah, exactly. I would get through a couple more issues, but I did want to hit this one because it kind of surprised me today. I'd read about it for the first time, but there was a vote in the Senate and the House to ensure that only citizens can vote in our elections in Texas. Now, this again seems like one of those head scratchers, and in fact, the Senate, it was not controversial at all. It passed 29-1. There was literally only one person.
Democrat author.
Yeah, was it?
Or not primary, but a Democrat author on the bill.
But you have 29, obviously very bipartisan in the Senate. It goes over to the House, and the House vote was very strange, which is why I wanted to highlight it. 88 votes in favor of making sure that only citizens, and this is an amendment to the Constitution, making sure that only citizens can vote in our elections. It was 88-0, with 54 Democrats voting present, not voting. Why did they do that? Well, because it takes 100 votes in the Senate and the House in order to pass a constitutional amendment. And so you have this strange situation where they don't want the bill to pass. They don't want it to be amended to our Constitution, but also don't want to be on record as opposing an amendment to the Constitution to ensure that only citizens can vote in Texas. What is going on here?
I think this is just poor caucus leadership, to be honest with you. And I think that it's attributable to, if you look at the speech that was laid out by caucus leadership, it was, this is already law. We don't need to help anybody doing this. Put a white light on that, and we can kill the JR, which is true. Now, in doing so, though, that they cut a primary ad for every single one of the.
That's what I'm looking at.
Yeah, every one of the 54. Their opponent on that, because again, this was a vastly approved bipartisan bill. Again, Jose Menendez in the Senate, nobody's idea of a rock-ribbed conservative, was on the bill, and he had some really good discussion with some of our folks on this bill when it was in the Senate about both Melissa Ford and Karine. Had those
From
discussions.
TVPF,
Had those discussions about what it meant to come to this country and to have that, and to get the franchise, and
to do it the right way, come over here, apply for citizenship, and be granted.
And it was just a good bipartisan moment. I'm pretty sure we clipped it and distributed it because Senator Menendez said some good things on that. The House would rather engage in political stunts and try to, again, if we were to take caucus leadership at his word and assume that this is already in statute and it needn't be adjudicated from, then why not take the easy vote?
Right.
But we're going to assert our collective will. And then, as you saw on the second reading deadline, when you try to assert your collective will as a group and you are collectively fewer than the other group, you want to reduce it to something that tribal, that wave comes crashing back.
But I just don't even understand how this could possibly be spun as good politics for the Democrats on this. I mean, we talk about it here all the time. Immigration and border security has been the number one issue in Texas for years now. It is a bipartisan issue. 70-something% of people say that there is a crisis at the border. In the last week, we've been talking about Title 42 and people, tens of thousands of people coming over every single day. We essentially have an open border here. I mean, now you take this vote in the context of all that, of course people are going to look at that and say, we've got all these people streaming into the United States who are not citizens, and you guys are opposing a bill which would limit or to ensure that only citizens can vote. Right. Are these two things connected? Well, in people's minds, and say, oh, well, you're not only for open borders, but now you're going to allow everybody coming over here to vote in our elections. Of course, people are going to make those connections.
Well, while you're seeing the dam break on this, I think that's also illustrative of the fact that what is the center of gravity in the Democrat Party, the Texas Democrats, is not the same center of gravity as where Democrat money is concerned. If you look at where a lot of the money in the state comes from, if you could reduce it to one particular stereotype, it's, the Terrytown limousine liberal, right? And, they, with their gated communities up there and their, friends and allies and aiders and abettors in the media, they have a very different worldview than the folks who actually have to live down on that border. And so to have this, again, kind of puritanical view on issues on issues like the border or, on the franchise of folks coming over, that completely misses the point of the realities on the ground, and it gets you these incredibly head-scratching votes, which, to be fair, it did kill the bill. But again, it only galvanized House Republicans then to inflict similar pain on the other side, up to and including, especially with all the stunts that we're doing with the chubbing, that they actually moved to call the question on a very important ESG bill.
And some of the border stuff is still up in the air, so we'll talk probably next week about kind of where all that laid out. But I just can't, for the life of me, I just was shocked at this, that they would do a stunt like this to kill a bill that I have never done any polling on this issue because I think it would be a waste of money, because obviously this is going to be a 90-10 issue, if that. that that people believe that if that only citizens should be able to vote in our elections. So anyway, just kind of a head scratching thing. Last issue I'll talk before we get to the dreaded S word is, and this is something I'm just interested in because we've looked at school safety issues and things like that. And one of the issues that divides, I think, divides the public, divides maybe even Democrats, certainly divides Republicans, is the issue of safety personnel in schools with guns. So I'll just say it like that because some people are talking about training teachers, actual teachers that work there, employees of the school, training them so that if they want to, they can actually have guns in schools and be prepared. Or the districts providing safety personnel to be in schools all of the times with firearms, and then also making it mandatory. That's another big issue, is that a lot of times people talk about, well, if you want to have a gun, you can, if you want to get trained up, or if you want to provide resources to have people there. The other question is, well, should we make it mandatory? Big divide, it feels like, between the House, and literally right now as we speak, there's a big debate going on one of the big school safety bills about that issue. Right. And so I wanted to dig into that a little bit because it seems to divide Republicans and conservatives a little bit.
Well, and you need to have a little bit of the nuance behind it as well, especially on the idea of the mandate armed security, however construed, at every campus. The problem is, left to their own devices, most school security setups focus more, and logically so, I think we can say, focus more on, say, high schools, right? I don't know about you, but again, I went to a not a bad high school, but not a great high school. So it makes sense, right? The problem, though, is then you get, lack of resources for places like Robb Elementary at that point. Now, the debate, and you mentioned the nuance about the security in schools, is one that tends to get lost into different factions. For example, if you look at, I believe there was a poll put out by the Texas chapter of AFT, the
teachers unions.
Yeah, the teachers unions. They celebrated this result, saying, "Oh, this idea is horrible. Look, like 75% of our members say this is bad." And I go, 25% of your members want to do this? Talk about burying the lead.
Yeah, that's the headline. A quarter of teachers want guns in schools.
Yeah, exactly, and want the ability to defend themselves. Yeah. And look, I'm not here to run their comms, or I'd love to for a day, but that's one of the things I don't understand, where if you can say that, look, you can look at that result and say most teachers don't want this. Fine. There is no proposal that I'm aware of where it is going to deputize by force every single teacher in a particular school district or on a particular campus. What the ideas that I've seen, much like you were talking about HB3, that it requires that box to be checked however you get there. Is it going to be school resource officers, which are officers pulled from county or municipal forces in the area? Is it going to be SBLE? Is it going to be school-based law enforcement? That's where we have the district itself running the police department. Now that's a whole other thing, which should broker some conversation as well. Is it going to be private security, classically construed, or is it going to be through the school guardians or marshals program? Again, these are all different ways of approaching this, but some of the deliberate lack of nuance tends to be trotted out there. Either, I don't know if it's a cynical ploy to get more money in the safety allotment, which has been raised, or if it's simply saying we want X, Y, and Z. A lot like the Chicago Teachers Union. They wanted first of the line when the vaccine came out, and then they wanted X, Y, Z, and then they had this whole list of things.
It was a wish list of union
10% of which might have been education related.
Right, exactly. And then we'll open schools.
Yeah, exactly. And then they still fought to keep schools closed. Yeah. But all that to say is, I usually, when I see a bill of goods, whenever I'm presented anything that are called demands, or I hear about anybody demanding something, I'm usually like, well, I don't negotiate with terrorists, and just throw it away.
So then, is your feeling then that the issue is not necessarily that there's a divide amongst conservatives, Republicans about having security in schools, but just really the way to go about it?
I think the security in schools component at that 30,000 foot level is broadly acceptable. it's the how do we get there? Are we, the state, going to fund or partially fund, private security? Are we going to liberalize or open up the way that we get guns in school for qualified people, marshals, guardians, whatever? Okay. Or are we going to knock down some of the barriers on SROs and SBLEs? That's a much deeper discussion. And just for my priors to be on the table, SBLEs I think are a bad alternative. Mostly not because I don't think cops should be in schools, quite the opposite. I think they do. I think that those cops should be part of a larger department that has better access to training, more of an eye towards interoperability, and a more of an eye to crisis response outside of that simple eight certification hours that you have to have on your TCOL certification when you apply.
And I'm probably one of those people that doesn't really help the debate. I'm not nuanced at all, and I'm lobbying. Look, we've got to get security personnel. We've got to get. I think it should be mandatory.
At that level, I completely agree.
And I mean, you want more money for schools. This is a good way to get my vote. Is to get more security in schools. I think it's crazy. I think it's been a soft target for so long, and it's been obvious that it's a soft target, and that's why it's a target. I mean, there's a reason why these crazy people aren't running into banks and trying to shoot a bunch of people, is because there's a guy standing there with a gun, and a number of different places, the courthouses and all these places where they are protected by guns. These are not hard targets. They're going to the schools because they know there aren't going to find resistance there. And of course, then once they're there, what stops the school shooting from happening? It's the people showing up with guns. And one of three things either happens: either they kill the guy, he kills himself, or he scares him off and they run him. Or at the very least, he has to start responding to the people who are behind him with the guns, and he stops killing the kids in the school. And so, look, I think for me, it's a no-brainer. Maybe I'm not.
You might think that's not nuanced or ham-fisted, but you didn't say anything incorrect.
Yeah. Well, anyway. So I'm just this kind of concerns me when I see people that I respect, and I'm sure that they have really good legitimate reasons for not wanting this. But I hope we get through this, because I think this is one of the things that needs to be part of those bills. Anyway. Yep. All right. Well, I want to get to the last thing we want to talk about, of course, is next week and the next month and the next months. And I think it's finally safe to say that the worst kept secret at the Capitol is that we're going to probably likely be in a special session to handle a couple of big issues, maybe 3 or 4 big issues, things like school choice and property tax cuts.
Yeah, if you look at what the governor said and you squint and you hold it up to the light and you do the Indiana Jones thing where it shines through, you can almost parse that where he said, pass this the way I want, or there'll be a special session, that he seems to be indicating there might be a special session.
All right, so we officially said it 3 times, so it will manifest, and we will be in a special session after Monday.
Don't put that evil on me, though.
The interesting thing, I think, for a lot of the insiders is, well, how many, right? Like, it's not, they're probably not the case that we're going to have one big special session, sometime in the summer where we handle all these issues, the grid and all this kind of stuff. Well, it's probably going to happen in multiple sessions, right?
Yeah, and I mean, again, we don't want to go into the procedural rabbit hole here, and I would.
That's what we do here, Derek.
That's true. That's fair. That's fair. I will say I am cautiously optimistic on the property tax side. I think that some of the signs that we've been seeing lately, again, alert the Kremlinologists, let's divine the goat entrails, get some
Snake
astrologers in here.
That,
exactly. Yeah. But I think they're closer than not on something that can go. Now, that being said, what's that going to look like? I guess we'll see. But I think we can say at this point that parental empowerment's not going to happen during a regular session, again, because Chairman Buckley even said, look, the governor, this is what we have. The governor said it's not good enough. Why am I going to put people up for bad votes? And of course, it's great to be a maximalist in that area, because I can just be like, make them walk the plank as many times as they want.
Yeah, I mean, even if you get something, you do the yeoman's work to get something out, the governor's going to veto. We'll be back in a special session no matter what.
And so I do think that is going to be the issue. You mentioned school choice and the grid. I think those will be 2 big things, and I'll tell you why. Obviously, I said it as a joke, but the governor did say, if you do not produce a parental empowerment plan up to a certain snuff, you're coming back. And I think that he's proven at this point that he is not going to take thin gruel on that. Mm-hmm. And so that you will most assuredly see. Now, what's that going to look like? Well, when you have a special session, obviously you only have 30 days to get everything done. All the timelines are radically dialed back.
So you can only call a special session for 30 days?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It can be far shorter.
Important point.
And when I say far short, a special session lasts no more than 30 days.
Right.
And they basically, as short as it is, depends on when they get, some of them have been, many of them go all 30 days. Some are like 28, 29, just kind of where it falls. So there's been one that was an hour before.
Oh, wow.
They didn't get much accomplished. That was back in the 30s.
You're all here. Now go home.
Yeah, back in the 30s, before it was that easy to get here, right? So anyway, all that said is they can only work on what the governor puts on that call. Mm-hmm. So it is going to laser focus. Now, again, I don't think by any imagination that he would waste his own time, let alone the time of the legislature, by having a single item call. I think that he would put other items on there, though who knows, maybe he would have a single item call if he wanted to make sure that is the only thing being dealt with. Mm-hmm. But again, you are going to see that. You are going to see school choice, and you are going to see that renewed laser focus. And then, hopefully he'll also be looking at some of the votes that are going on and some of the folks who might need encouragement in one way or another. I'd also say the grid, much like school choice, the ideas on how to fix it are, there's not a lot of intercameral consensus on that. Mm-hmm. And the Senate has put some good stuff out, and the House, to their credit, even when seeking a corporate welfare bill, have excluded some of the stuff that have led to some very problematic issues with our grid prior, specifically that on non-dispatchable energy
You can
sources.
just say wind and solar.
Yeah, but geothermal. But no, all that to say is they definitely have different approaches to that. I think they're farther apart on that than it is on property tax. Now, don't get me wrong, property taxes are a serious issue. Everyone's feeling the pain, and that tends to have percolated to the top. The grid, that is going to be something where if it is not substantially fixed, not only will everyone feel the pain, I think that they're, just with the long shadow from the freeze from 21, I think you're going to see political futures.
Yeah, back to our poll, even in that UT Tyler poll, the state is still split, almost 50-50 on whether or not they feel like the legislature has done enough to fix the grid, or whether or not we'll see some more blackouts. We've got PUC, putting out warnings and things like that. So
the grid is such a complex policy realm, I would say, not even an issue, but a realm, that the average respondent on a poll, unless they had something to do with the way we actually have a completely decentralized non-capacity market, their opinion is simply just that.
And while we have literally just like 60 seconds left, I am interested in, a lot of people think about, who are not avid watchers like we are, work into it and say, why are we waiting 3 months? Why are, they talk about having a September special, for this issue or that. Why don't we just pull them back in? They're already here, get it done, stay here for 30 more days until we get it done. What would be the reason why you would want to push it out?
Well, I know Perry did that a couple of times, the see you tomorrow, the famous see you tomorrow message.
Yeah.
But I do think it is, for especially the issues that we're talking about, I don't necessarily think that giving some time to decompress, to cool down, is bad. Not because, the lawmakers deserve a vacation, even though they have been working, at least for the last, month and a half or so, very, very hard. But I think that especially with these issues where there is still some distance between a consensus, both between the chambers, the different caucuses themselves, and other stakeholders, I think that in earnest, that is what can be developed in that intervening time.
Yeah.
What is a broad acceptable school choice package that'll satisfy the governor and then 75 or 76 members of the House? What does that look like?
Yeah.
What does the grid option that does not leave does not leave Texas in the lurch, what does that look like? And so developing that consensus is then the project for that intervening time period.
So, in addition to cool down, also a time to kind of step back and say, okay, if we want it, we're going to have to come to some kind of agreement on this. Let's get done with the session and just focus on this. Also, as you mentioned, the vast majority of members don't, live around here, and so they have to go. They've been away from their families for 4 months. And whether or not they're going on vacation, they still need to, attend to the, yard and fit, clean out the garage and do some things they haven't done for the last few months. And
try using that on my HOA. Like, I'm going to mow the lawn in July.
Yeah, I'll tell you, it's going to take 4 months. Work is busy. I've got to go back. All right. Well, we have definitely gone over time, but there was a lot to talk about in the last week. We will be here, of course, next week talking about kind of wrap up. Again, we want to pitch our event at TPPF on Wednesday. Our CEO and Derek and others will be talking about kind of what the good, the bad, and the ugly, and the dead, and all of that other stuff that we talk about here. It'll be a big wrap up on Wednesday. We'd love to have you either come and join us here at TPPF, or you can watch it online as well. Get those details at texaspolicy.com. So again, as always, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. As I always like to say, do good and risk the consequences, and we'll see you next time.